Uh, for me, I believe in God. I'm here Sunday, you know, worship team. But what's amazing is you don't have to be a Christian or believe in God to experience God. Just a suggestion that might be possible. So for me, so Jesus loves me. 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. This is what, there's a part where I write it down. I still do this. Today I just came from doing step 10 and 4 and 5, what we're going over now. I wrote down some things that was happening and what I was perceiving to have happen and my part in it. Not someone else's part. I can't do someone else's stuff, but what my part in it was. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact natures of our wrongs. I'm sharing with someone. All of a sudden, I find that those thoughts are starting to lose power over me, and they're not influencing my behavior as much. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. I've found that sometimes I'm not ready to let go. You know, they say surrender, right? Surrender? Sounds familiar, I bet. Sometimes I'm not ready to surrender, you know, and, they say God is a good acronym, gift of desperation. So, sometimes it takes a little while. 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Like, please help me. I'm experiencing these things. I don't know what to do, but I know that what I'm thinking is not the truth. So now I'm ready for some sort of change. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So now that's when step 4 comes right back in, the same source. What I've realized is that sometimes what's caused me to feel a certain way, I'm like, wait a second, that's showing up in this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. It's like, could it be that it's not that person? Could it be that it's not that event? It's like, wait a second. All of a sudden I'm realizing that there's a little bit like a mustard seed of doubts that was actually true. It probably wasn't the person, probably wasn't the place. And from there, a lot of forgiveness and a love it can germinate. I've seen it happen. It's really magical to see someone's eyes light up. I get to experience that as a part of these steps. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. That is a lot of magic. I have a lot of relationships, not only in the church, but outside of the church that are a direct result of me realizing what I was doing, projecting a frustration that I had in not modifying my behavior or my approach, and projecting it onto someone else that cared about me and loved me. And to come from a place where, to admit my own wrongs, to say, hey, this is what I was going through. I was going through a really tough time, but man, I'm sorry about that. And things are different now. And, if there's anything I can do to make it up, just tell me, I'll do it. No one's going to, there's a lot of, it takes a lot of courage to do that. So and step 12, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but to guide someone through this process, because someone else did that for me. 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So getting us in the habit of doing things, rechanging our behavior. So I learned how to be a certain way, but to reprogram and to retrain, and to continually do so. 11, sought through prayer, meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. So to continue to improve our contact with a loving source. I think this step 11 is something that I have to continually remind myself to do and keep track of. So 10, 11, 12 are the ones that are never ending, they're revolving. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. That's one of the harder ones to do. But my first sponsor for 2 weeks, he said to me that all the magic is in step 12, and I found that to be true. I was sharing about that earlier on in a meeting that I started. Now we have a Narcotics Anonymous meeting here for anyone who who may need help. I came back and I was like, we got to start one of those, and I realized I was the one who needed help. But now, a while later, now we have it. That sort of, just to have that sort of care for a person from a place of, for me, of having been so selfish. Of just like, addiction is a very selfish disease. A disease in that it progressively gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. To start to care about someone else and then to be able to think about someone else, like it took practice. So to practice it in one area, to think about, if you think about the scope of learning, it's really hard to master every area. But if you could just focus and apply your energy to one area, it can then spread to various other fields. And I get to experience that in my other areas of life. In music, I have more jobs. I have more jobs and get to help a lot of people. So I hope Leo can tie what I'm saying into a message about the Sermon on the Mount. So thanks, guys, for letting me share.
Can we put them up again? I just want us to see it's very practical, right? And the transformation that happens with your behavior always starts with a heart thing, right? Admitting, hey, we need this God. And the theme of like kind of dealing with things immediately, right? Like sin is serious. We should deal with it immediately. The thing of reconciling. Number 9, make direct amends. And I just want us to see that because I want us to understand that as Jesus is sharing these things, he's not talking about vague theological things. He's talking about practical things that we experience in a different way maybe in our culture than his, but that we experience in everyday life. Okay, so moving on, let's look at chapter 5, verse 31 through 37 of Sermon on the Mount. And it was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said of those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. All right, we got to dig into the history. Are you guys ready to dig? Look at your neighbor and say, I'm ready to dig. So there are two things happening here. Back then, a woman had very few rights. And so if you divorced a woman, you actually needed to write her what was called a certificate of divorce, because that would then entitle her the ability to remarry. So rather than people thinking that she's some adulterous woman, instead she shows a certificate, and that tells somebody that she is okay to marry, or she has the right to marry. And there are two schools of thought about what it meant, or what are grounds for divorce. There was one school that was very conservative that said only in adultery can you divorce. And there was a more liberal school that said anything that is indecent, you can divorce. And indecency sometimes was literally this: she burned your food. Right? So some Jewish teachers taught, she burns your food, that's indecent. Or you're no longer attracted to her, that's indecent, you can divorce her. So that's one of the things that was happening. The thing about the oaths refers to this idea back in ancient times that if someone said they were going to do something, how could you be sure they were going to do it? I mean, we still go through that today. And in those days, if you made a promise, I promise I'm going to show up at this time at KGB Burger, not the Russian thing, and I'll meet you there. If you make that promise, you don't know if that person is going to fulfill it. But if they make an oath, especially if they make an oath to God and say, I swear by God that I will meet you at, Kiwi Gourmet Burgers at this time, then it's almost as if they're saying that I'm fulfilling a promise not to you but to God. So naturally, people wanted to find loopholes, Because what if you wanted to sound like you were serious and sound like you were going to go through with it, but you didn't really mean to go through with it? You know what I mean? Like someone says, can you hang out sometime? And we say, yeah, sure, I'll let you know. Or, that sort of situation. And so what they started doing was, instead of swearing by God, they swore by the earth, or they swore by Jerusalem. And so they sounded like they were serious, but in reality, it gave them a way out. And they also said, I swear by my head, which means I may or may not, I'm not sure. Okay, and so these things were going on where people were trying to find loopholes so that they didn't have to fulfill their promises. So they thought, as long as you wrote a certificate of divorce, you're okay. They thought, as long as you didn't swear by God, you're okay. You're not held liable. And instead, what Jesus does, instead of dealing with, is it okay or is it not okay, he actually invites them and us into a whole new way of living. And what he's doing is he is giving a picture to the people he's teaching and to us. Here is what my kingdom looks like. Here is what it looks like if God rules. Because in my kingdom, people stay married. People find a way to work out their differences in my kingdom. That's what it looks like when I rule. In my kingdom, people just mean what they say. Wouldn't that be great? Right, here is what the world looks like. When someone makes a promise, you can trust that they're going to go through with it. Right? Wouldn't it be beautiful if we lived in a world where people just meant what they said? Wouldn't it be beautiful if we lived in a world where married people could work out their differences and instead of divorcing, just stuck it out? Because guess what? That was God's intention from the beginning. And so he's painting this picture of, here's what it looks like if you want to see my kingdom here on earth. Here's what the Beatitudes look like. Here's what it looks like when someone is a peacemaker, when they reconcile. Here's what it looks like when someone is meek, when they don't retaliate. Here's what it looks like, right? And he's giving us a very clear picture of what the kingdom looks like and what we as citizens of the kingdom should look like as we live out this calling practically, empowered by God. Are you there? Yeah, okay. Well, all right, let's move on then. Okay, so he's going to continue in the Sermon on the Mount, giving us a picture of a radical way of living that reflects the kingdom. Here we go, Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse to the one who would borrow from you. Okay, so what is happening? This idea of eye for an eye, if you look back at the context, what it actually dealt with is if you accidentally hit a pregnant woman and injured her or her offspring before she gave birth. And so the question was, if I accidentally hit a pregnant woman, what is the appropriate retribution, right? What do I owe her for accidentally injuring her? And so the rule was, or the law was, as God gave it, is you can ask for no more in return than what was injured. So if you, accidentally elbowed a pregnant woman for whatever reason, like we were in some concert and I was in a mosh pit, I just elbowed her in the eye, and her eye gets injured, she could ask for no more than the value of that eye. Okay? And so what this law did is it did two things. It defined justice, and justice was you get paid back whatever you lost, but it also limited retribution. And this was revolutionary back in the day. And I would say even revolutionary now. Because when someone offends me, what do I want to do? I want to offend them more. Right? I don't want just what they owe me. I actually want to go a little bit further. And so God had put this law in place to stop that. So that there's no, there's not this cycle of revenge. Is everyone there? Okay, good. You guys are great today. No amens yet. No amens. That's okay. We're working up to it. Some of you may be uncomfortable with saying amen. You should really repent about that. Okay? And so what Jesus is going to do is he's going to present these three situations and show us what a kingdom person would do to respond to the situation. Again, not theological or vague, but very practical, but not rules. Okay? I want to set that aside right away. It's going to seem like rules, but what kind of relationship would it be if my wife and I sat down and said, okay, here are the rules to a happy relationship, right? That's not what God is after. He's showing us instead a way to live and respond to the situation. So he says, do not resist, okay? Now, when we see that, we could really misunderstand that and think that God is asking us to be passive. Like, okay, evil person comes and robs my house. I'm not going to resist. Please take my dirty dishes, okay, as well. But that can't be what it's about, because we see in the Bible that Jesus resists when the time is right. We see throughout church history that the church resists evil and stands up for what's right. The better translation for that word resist is actually to not take a contrary position as an evil person. And what that's getting at is, in other words, don't compete with an evil person. So if an evil person comes and slaps you, what's your response? Is just a natural response to slap them back. But Jesus is saying, don't compete with an evil person, but instead use wisdom in how to handle the situation in a godly way. Romans 12 puts it this way: repay no one evil for evil, but give thought, there it is, give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Okay, so he talks about these three things. One of them is if someone slaps you. Now, in that culture, you do not slap with your left hand because your left hand is unclean for reasons that we shall not go into. So you slap with your right hand, okay? And then it says, what hand does it say? Can we put that verse? I think it says, if they slap your right cheek. Yes, okay. Now, if I'm going to slap somebody, let's not do a demo, with my right hand on their right cheek, how do I have to do it? Backhand. Right? I guess I could do this, but that's weird, right? So it has to be backhand. Now, in those days, backhand was very, very insulting. And in fact, it's how a superior would treat like a slave. They would backhand slap on their right cheek, and then all of a sudden, Jesus is saying, give them the other cheek. Right? That's pretty extreme. And then he talks about this thing that if someone asks for your tunic, which is like an inner garment, then give them your cloak. Now, back in the days, you were entitled to one thing for sure, and that was your cloak, which is like a coat. Because your cloak was the only thing that kept you warm. And it's what you slept in. And so even if you owed somebody something and you said, okay, take my cloak, they have to, by Jewish law, give you back your cloak at the end of the day. So you were entitled to your cloak, no matter what. And Jesus is saying, if somebody takes your shirt, give them your cloak or your coat as well. This thing that you actually have a right to by Jewish law. In other words, he's saying, how should I say this? You're basically accepting an invitation to sleep naked. Is that okay to say at church? Naked, okay? And then he talks about this thing of if someone asks you to go a mile, go another one. And the law back then is a Roman soldier could come up to any non-Roman citizen, Jewish citizen, and say, hey, carry my equipment for a mile. And the law said he could ask you to carry his equipment for a mile. And Jesus is saying, in that situation, go another mile. Right? I mean, this is crazy. It's as if Jesus is saying, if you're riding around Taipei in your scooter and somebody hits your scooter, okay, knocks you down, you get up and what you do is you pay them for the damage you might have caused to their car or scooter, even though they hit you. How difficult is that, right? Who in their right mind would do that, right? But he's basically saying when we feel insulted, when we feel like we're taken advantage of, there is kind of a different way to live that is empowered by him. Okay, so I have 3 points. I hate 3-point sermons, but I got 3 points. Here we go. Okay, so what is Jesus telling us? Point number 1, waive your rights. Turn to your neighbor and say, waive your rights. Right? It means give up your right, okay? If somebody slaps me, don't I have the right to slap them back? Yeah. if somebody offends me, don't I have the right to feel bitter or offended? Yeah. But yet, what Jesus is saying is the right you have to feel offended, the right you have to strike back, the right you have to talk back and retaliate, give that up. And that is such a difficult message to tell a society like ours where we are described mostly by one word, and that is entitled. That we all feel like, I have a right to this space, I have a right to feel a certain way, I have a right to feel secure. But Jesus is saying, waive that right in these situations. And let me just say this. You can only waive your right if you understand you're not the only one defending yourself. You're only able to give up the right to retaliate and to get what you feel is rightfully yours if you understand that you are not the only person who is supporting you and you are not the only one concerned with your reputation and your future. Because when we retaliate, who are we focused on? Ourselves. Right? Right when somebody slaps us, we turn inwards, we feel insulted, we feel ashamed, and it's all about us. And when we retaliate, what are we saying? Who is the best one to help us? Ourselves. But a person who understands that we are not the only one who is concerned with our success and with our reputation will be able to waive their rights. And so what Jesus is doing is he's inviting us to a situation to use our wisdom to say, when you come against this desire to fight back, maybe sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, what you should do is just trust that I have your best interests and I have your back. And you know what? This seems kind of evil, but God's retribution is much better than our retribution, right? It could be good, though. That sounds really harsh. I'll edit that. Okay? So waive your rights. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where people didn't feel the need to fight back over such petty things, over such little things that really mean nothing? The second thing I would like us to notice is that the actions that God is actually asking us to live out, it comes from a position of strength. Position of strength. It takes strength not to retaliate, does it not? It takes a really strong person to not fight back, does it not? I mean, I've heard stories where professional boxers get mugged. And you know, they could probably kill that person that mugged them. But they came from a position of strength and instead didn't use what they could have used to fight back for whatever reason. It takes someone who's secure in their relationship with God to not worry about how others perceive you. It takes someone who is confident in God's approval and God's plan to not fight back in certain situations. It takes someone who understands that only God's opinion matters to not try to defend yourselves and look bad in the eyes of man. It takes strength. And in fact, I would argue that people that always fight back, they're very insecure. American president, right? No, I'm not supposed to get political. I'll edit that, okay? But what Jesus is inviting us to do when we waive our rights is to actually not live in weakness, but actually come from a position of strength because we're empowered by God, who will take care of us and who will defend our reputation and who does love and approve of us and does have a plan for us to live this way. Last thing, living like this actually exposes darkness. Turn to your neighbor and say, expose darkness. So the actions that Jesus is inviting us to do actually exposes kind of the pettiness of the world, doesn't it? Like, really, you're going to slap me and you think that's such a big deal? Here, slap my other cheek. But what's kind of interesting is if I offer the other cheek, right? So I slap backhand. When someone offers the other cheek, how do they have to slap you? Forehand. Again, you can do this, but forehand, right? Now, backhand is how a superior treated an inferior. Forehand is how equals fought. So all of a sudden, if you're like, slap this one too, the person will be like, oh, what? They didn't know what to do because by actually doing it, they're now admitting to, I'm not superior, I'm actually equal. And it kind of creates this very strange dynamic in those days, right? Remember, the law said you could have your tunic. You could have your cloak. So if you give someone your cloak, you're like, you know what, take this as well. It puts them in a position where they're breaking the law. And so, again, there'd be this awkwardness, right? We know all about awkwardness. It'd be like, okay. The law said that the Roman soldier can only ask you to carry it a mile. If you went further, that soldier could actually get in trouble for asking you to go further than the law. So in other words, when you say, here, let me take it further, all of a sudden, they're put in a position where they're going to break the law. And it kind of, what it does is it makes them think twice, doesn't it? It makes them think twice to say, what am I doing? It kind of helps us when we respond in a way that is so unexpected, that is so contrary to how the world would respond. It helps us to be that salt and that light that Alex talked about. It helps us to show the world that there's a different flavor. It helps us to show the world that there's kind of a different way to live. Right? Earlier in the service, or before service, I was just talking to Pavel, and he was saying how he was in the army. Army? Yeah. And one of his higher-ups just called him in and just started like swearing and just going off on him. And maybe because it was the army, but how he responded was, do you feel better? Right? And the guy was like, yeah, I do. And he's like, thank you, sir. Right? And he walked, and in that moment, can you imagine from that point of view that you're so angry, and then what you expect someone to be angry back, but what you see instead is someone who shows care, someone who shows that they actually care about you and are willing to let you kind of vent on them. It changes your heart, doesn't it? It's really easy to be angry at someone that fights back because we feel so justified, don't we? Like if someone argues back with us, then we feel like, yeah, I had a right to feel that way about them. But now all of a sudden, if you're okay, like I'm a math teacher. So if I'm like, why the heck can't you do fractions, you blah, 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 and I just tear that kid apart, if the kid was like, I'm just lazy, okay, I hate you and hate this class, then I will feel very justified yelling at, I don't yell at kids, but in my dreams I do, right? But I feel very justified. But if that student is like, I'm so sorry, then, ooh, what? It exposes, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible human being. And I probably should not be in a classroom. It exposes the darkness in people's lives when they come face to face with light, doesn't it? And so when God is asking us, instead of doing what is so expected, live in an opposite way, it's actually saying, expose the darkness in the world and show them what my kingdom looks like. What an invitation. What an invitation. But here's what it really comes down to, okay? Matthew 5, let's move on. 43 through 47. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Let's go back to the beginning of that. It says, hate your enemy. Okay? Hate your enemy. That's actually not a verse from the Old Testament. It's just an understanding that they came up with that my enemy is anyone that doesn't know God. And they felt that it was justified for them to hate a person that doesn't know God. Right? But Jesus instead is saying, no, you should love those people that don't know God. And then one thing that we have to make clear is at the end of the passage it says, you shall be perfect. You shall be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. The word is actually better translated as a sense of maturity. So in other words, what it's saying is live in a mature way that reflects who God is. Not that you are perfect, because we know that that's not going to happen, right, on this earth. And so what that's really saying is live in a way that reflects God, because the key verse is there. 45, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. And really all these things that Jesus is talking about, of turning the other cheek and of carrying the soldier's equipment, it really comes down to this. We're called to live that way so that we can reflect the spiritual DNA that's within us. That as kingdom people, we are called to live this way so that we can show the world who our Father is. And if you really look at what's happening, there's kind of a theme of forgiveness throughout this passage, isn't there? Because it takes forgiveness to not retaliate. It takes forgiveness to turn the other cheek. It takes forgiveness to give someone your cloak even though they've insulted you and have treated you in a way that is not right? That's what forgiveness is about, isn't it? Waiving your right to feel offended. And what this is inviting us to do is saying, look, world, this is what my Father looks like. That my Father, when mocked, when my Father, when persecuted, did not retaliate. Because it wasn't really his job to defend himself. And in a small way, what we're being asked to do is to show the world, this is what my Father looks like. That when he was slapped, that when he was victimized, this God, who could have easily destroyed his enemies, instead chose to love them. So there's the practical side that God is telling us, live this way, to expose darkness, to come from a position of strength, to waive our rights. But really, at the end of the day, we live this way so the world will get a taste of a Father who loved his enemies. And they would understand what the forgiveness of God looks like in a small way. Can we close our eyes, and can I have the music team come up? As usual, I'm under the firm belief that the best things happen when I get out of the way. And I think that God spoke to us individually in different ways, and we need to spend a little bit of time just wrestling with these things. And maybe for some of you, as I've been sharing these past 2 weeks about anger and now about living a certain way, that certain people come to mind. It could be from the past or the present. And these people you feel like you just can't forgive. And these people have hurt you so deeply in a way that turning the other cheek just seems impossible. That even though you know God has called us to do it, you say, no, God, I can't do that, God. If only you knew what that person did. Maybe today we need to reflect on the way we offend God. Maybe today we need to realize that we're the ones that just with our lives slap God in the face. And maybe through the Spirit's work could understand what forgiveness looks like for us at a much deeper level, and could extend that same forgiveness to those people that we feel have done something so offensive that there's no way. Maybe for some of you, you need to understand that God has your back. That God is supporting you, whatever trials you're going through, whatever ways maybe your reputation is being tarnished. That we would just be reminded that, hey, God is looking out for you, for your dreams, for your success, for your reputation. And in whatever way God spoke to you, just take these last 10 minutes to respond, and then the music team will respond, lead us in a couple songs as another way, really to tell God, thank you. Another way to cry out. So let's give you some time to pray.